Hey guys, what's up? This is Ian. I wanted to do a video walking through my fortress in Dwarf Fortress. This is the Steam version, obviously. This will be my first Dwarf Fortress on the Steam version after playing the older versions for something like a decade. So wanted to kind of fill in a void that I'm perceiving on YouTube, where I think a lot of YouTubers are putting up videos that have, how to get started, what to do for your first fortress, things like that, but not so much giving a good example of what to be working towards or what to expect your fortress to look like around the mid game. In this game here, I'm in year 110, so not super late. It'll be 10 years after I think I originally embarked. But at this point, I've reached the second cavern level. I've fought numerous goblin sieges, as well as probably 5 or 6 forgotten beasts, and some other comparable threats. So again, just kind of wanted to walk through my fortress, talk about some of the strategies and some of the lessons learned, and hopefully give you guys a sense of what to expect once you get to around this year in your own Dwarf Fortress. So first thing I want to start out with on the first level is you can kind of see here the original start of how my fortress initiated, right? I had my wagon probably right around here, just dug down, and then built around it for these basic workshops, which are still on the first floor. Then you have kind of this classic tower defense style hallway that forces enemies to kind of go through should they attack, and then some cage traps here deployed on that in that hallway, and a drawbridge as well on the off chance I want to totally seal off that mini fortress. I just went up to the second floor. Just want to also call out, I had built up here and created fortifications. This is something that you can do to walls using that same move with the smooth and engrave menu. This fourth option, this is fortifications. The thinking is that you can set up a burrow and make it so your crossbow squad will camp here and shoot arrows into the invaders going through this little hallway. Unfortunately, I could not get my crossbow squad to train, and I just couldn't get it to work. I'm not really sure why. I've done it 100 times. I don't know if it's a glitch or it's just something I made a mistake, but so that has not been used. But that is the thinking behind that. But what happened is, as I expanded, around the time I probably was segueing into steel, and had 2 or 3 squads, this was when I started to have to build out on the first floor. Reasons could include A, I wanted a bigger pasture. B, I do like having some of my buildings here on the top floor for things like an inn/tavern, guild halls, and other buildings that I tend to have open to the general public, right? So if I were to hover this temple, go to the details, whatever, you have these 4 things. I can have it open to everybody, only long-term residents, dwarves that live here, and only members of this guild. I tend to have those open to everybody, but I'll keep them on the first floor and with general access to the public. And this is something that you'll run into probably around this point in the game, or maybe in 3 or 5 years in Dwarf Fortress game time, is that a lot of your dwarves will have petitions they submit for guild halls and things like that to be created for their various guilds, and that's when I kind of start creating these up here. And what you'll also notice is that they may include certain value requirements for the zone or for the room, right? So here you can see the value is actually portrayed. So guild hall 2k, next at 10,000, and if you accept a petition to improve the quality of this guild hall, it will also indicate here, a petition has been accepted to get it to 10,000 or whatever. But yeah, so my general approach for these kinds of buildings is, they more or less follow the same formula, engraving all of the walls and the floors. Using spamming statues is an easy way to get value in, as well as tables and chairs. And then another thing is you can deploy items, legendary objects, artifacts is what they're really called, right? To different display cases. So these are like pedestals. So it would be, work order. I think I just use wooden pedestal. They obviously can be made in every material, but that way you can actually deploy some of the nicer objects that you've created, including artifacts. You can keep it there and it will contribute its value to the value of the room. So that's another way to get your room value up. Here's an instrument. This particular type of instrument actually doesn't need a display case. It can just be kind of built like furniture with a BF and then instrument I. So that's pretty much it. Another thing you'll see that I've put into these areas are food storage, food and drink. It's really because it's good to have food and drink kind of littered throughout your fortress, because you could have a bunch of food and drink like this fortress does, but your dwarves, if they have to run 50 Z levels to get to it, they'll get unhappy thoughts about being dehydrated. So I tend to put them obviously in the inn and tavern here, as well as guild halls and stuff like that. Not only on the first floor, but just scattered throughout. Additionally, from an architecture standpoint, you can see that I've expanded out the walls, obviously, and actually expanded out here. Reason behind this area is, you do want to have like a separate, larger, I just did this with wood, area to, if you need to like gather or log in a circumstance where all your dwarves shouldn't go outside, you have your drawbridge up or whatever. I tend to have like a modular expansion to account for that scenario here, and that's also where I have my farm plots and stuff. And another point on architecture, what I'll get into more a little bit later, is once you've been playing Dwarf Fortress for a while, you kind of get tired of just square rooms all the time. And so one of the easiest ways to kind of get some variation is usually implementing diagonals like this. I'll say that constructing them is a pain, but digging them is easy. So it takes a while to sit there and for each of these little walls, I can't just drag this diagonally and be good to go. You kind of have to sit there and, okay, 1 building, 2 building, 3 building, 4 building, 5 building, 6 building, 7 building orders to make this one little diagonal. So kind of tedious for building, but for digging it's much easier. I'll talk about that, and you'll see that in a little bit. And then another thing, obviously I'm statues pretty much everywhere just to give happy thoughts. Obviously also using a lot of this road to really just satisfy an aesthetic, to be honest. So totally optional, I would say, but one thing I want to point out, I want to talk about this. So you build this type of road, it's actually not floor, it's paved road, which tends to come out in this gray color regardless of the material used. So all of this is like wood, I'm pretty sure, but it still comes out looking like it's stone, which is kind of nice. One thing to keep in mind though is that unlike regular floor, which this is floor, you cannot build anything on top of road. That includes like these statues, right? These two statues are actually beneath, or on top of grass, and I would not be able to build like statues here to make it symmetrical. You cannot build on top of this. That also importantly applies to traps. You can see here my road actually ends. I have these traps on just the plain grass. So and that is why here I do have floor with traps on it. But other than those shortcomings, roads use less resources. So if you want to have an aesthetic going on in your Dwarf Fortress and don't want your dwarves to spend 10 hours hauling stuff around, or use up all of your precious minerals or resources or whatever, you can use these paved roads in lieu of regular floors for these outdoor environments, but definitely not suggested for indoor. And I think that pretty much covers everything here on the first floor I wanted to go over. Obviously using a lot of walls for defense. I do have the drawbridge. Don't tend to use that at this point because my military is strong enough to pretty much take anything that's going to come on this top level. Anything really threatening is coming from below. I will say that if you take this approach, your fortress, if it is attacked by anything that has the ability to climb walls, they'll climb right over this wall and just get right in your business, not really care about the walls at all. Another potential scenario is for, if you'll see, one of the forgotten beasts that attacked me was this rock, which is a winged creature that can fly. So when it came, it just flew right over this wall, and we duked it out, probably right around here. But just something to keep in mind, that walls are pretty effective, especially in routing things like goblins and other mundane creatures that are bipedal and cannot fly. But for anything that can climb the wall or fly over it, they're not going to do anything to protect your dwarves. So just something to keep in mind there. And one last thing I wanted to mention, I have here a lot of the caged humans, goblins, and Dwarf. Those are Cavern things. I have them deployed here. If you deploy cages in a zone like that, it should default the room to a zoo if they're occupied cages. And you set it to meeting area. You can't actually specify that, right? And it will even only show up as a statue garden, I think, if I were to click this cage. No. But yeah, but if you have caged animals or humans or whatever, and you assign a meeting area there, and as long as you don't specify the dungeon, it should be viewed as a zoo. That's pretty funny way to pretty funny thing to do with your prisoners. Obviously, I have many more. I don't really want to deploy every single one, but it's a little something funny there. Cool. Alright, so let's move on to the next floor. This is where actually all of my barracks are. All of these are dedicated to barracks. This one looks like it needs to be expanded. So barracks, obviously at this point in the game, you're going to need squads of trained dwarves, preferably pretty well equipped. Steel. I'll actually talk about my squads in a sec, but I do want to very quickly, again, here's my training area for the crossbow. I had mentioned this earlier. I think I can't quite get this to work, so I don't know if you guys want to reply in the comments as to maybe what I'm doing wrong here. I have bolts, I have the targets, I have the range, the direction looks right. I assigned the squad to use it. I should probably unassign it since these guys are no longer arrows. I switch everyone to warhammers. But yeah, I don't know. But yeah, this is where they train and stuff. Maybe, I guess, a farm plot here for ratweed. Cool. I do want to talk about how I'm equipping my dwarves. So all of them have steel everything for the most part, if not absolutely. I tend to do iron and then transition into steel. A lot of people just go right to steel and then to adamantium or whatever the end game mineral is, or ore is rather. Right now I'm at full steel. I think around this time, 110, you would want to be steel. It definitely helps when you're fighting goblin raids of like 20 plus goblins, or more threatening is really those forgotten beasts. I tend to see that if all of my dwarves are assigned to attack one forgotten beast, what ends up happening is that they kind of trickle in. Sometimes very hard to get dwarves to be totally blobbed and like totally effectively and efficiently apply damage. You just don't have that granularity of control. So I would say on average I lose probably one dwarf per engagement with a forgotten beast. Sometimes it's 0 dwarves, sometimes it's 2. But what you'll tend to find is that your dwarves will kind of trickle in, at least to get the fight started, and that's where you'll lose a dwarf or 2. Having full steel equip will really help, if not anything better than that. Obviously you'll be doing even better. But at this point, with the amount of stuff I have and the lateness of the game, I'm getting at least a forgotten beast a season. So it's pretty frequent, and I would say any kind of beginner would probably have been wiped out at this point. So yep, that's what I have equipped. Scheduling, I don't do anything too crazy with this. I just tend to manually tell one squad to train, then take them off and have another squad training. I advise having a squad training at all times. I'm breaking my own rule right now on that, only because it takes dwarves a little bit to get their gear and get ready to fight if something arrives. So if it's specifically Forgotten Beasts, if it arrives, they're just making a beeline for your fortress. And what I'll tend to do is have my dwarves, select, and I'll tell them to attack the Forgotten Beast. But they still have to run and get their armor and get from wherever they want to be. So if I have a squad training at all times, there's always going to be a group that's ready to respond to a threat like a Forgotten Piece that is not going to just wait around. It's just going to make its way right into your fortress as quickly as it can, usually coming from that bottom layer. Once you've reached the caverns is where most of my Forgotten Beasts have arrived. So yeah, so steal equipment, make sure that they're trained up, have one squad training at all times, and 3 squads. You could probably make more. Honestly, I have a pop cap of 150. I could have more squads if I wanted to. 3 seems to be doing the trick, though. Alright, making my way down a little bit. I want to talk about food at this stage. Food and drink. Obviously, I have a lot of both, including fish and meat. What I'll say is that once you get past a certain point, farming for food is kind of not really needed. And you can see, I mean, I have some stuff planted, but I'm barely farming. Reason being is that you could just buy out merchants once you have some pretty decent craftsmanship stuff produced, right? So I can buy out an entire merchant of all of their food and drink for 10 platinum amulets, and then you know what I'm saying, and you'll just be good to go for a long time. And just keep consistently doing that. You don't really need to be farming. I will say, however, that it is important to farm rope weeds or something that you can extract thread from for the purpose of creating clothes for your dwarves, as well as hospital stuff, which I'll talk about in a moment. But again, for food, farming, going through the process of making the fertilizer and all that stuff, at least in this area that I'm in, because I get so many merchants, not really something that I concern myself about. And obviously I have plenty of food. Okay, so getting into this next level, another thing you'll start to run into with a fortress this late in the game is that your dwarves, because you have so many, there are many different deities or gods that they need to pray to. Most are polytheistic, so I have a bunch of temples. Some are devoted to specific gods, some you can mark as just no specific deity. Either is fine, really, but that is something that you will have to do. I tend to just throw a bunch of statues in there. You also should throw instruments in there, and you'll see that they even are asking for performers and instruments. I don't have those here. I don't, obviously it does not prevent my dwarves from actually worshipping there, but if I guess you wanted to take it to the next level, you could have instruments and performance there. Also have a library. This is not really super necessary. It's just another thing you can put together. But while I'm here, it's actually just reminded me of something. So for these zones, for your temples, for your inn, again, you have the option of sending them all visitors welcome, citizens and long-term residents only, or citizen only. All visitors welcome. The only risk I've encountered with this is that a necromancer will visit. It will not be hostile while it's visiting, but say he was hanging out in this temple or stepped outside for a moment or whatever, even to leave, and a forgotten beast, a rock, was flying over this wall, and it aggroed the necromancer would start doing magic and summoning things or whatever that will attack your dwarves. So there's the potential for a necromancer to be visiting and snap and create like a bad situation. Other than that, I have not really encountered any big risk to having all visitors welcome to these areas, even the ones that are, you know, in my fort. So like even this is all visitors. I think it should be fine. There probably is even a necromancer in here. Again, as long as you're careful about not letting them get aggroed or pissed off or whatever, then you should be fine. Coffins, obviously. I want to talk about this really fast, so you'll obviously have a lot of dwarven deaths. A lot of these are actually children. There was like a weir hyena that came and killed a bunch of children. Um, but what a lot of newer players will run into, or intermediate players really, once they start losing dwarves at this rate, they're in situations where they may not be able to recover their bodies to properly place them in coffins, and they'll get ghosts. And you can check if you have a ghost by just going to units and then go to others. And there should be like a listed ghost here that you can see. And you'll also get notifications that so-and-so is getting haunted by a ghost. So if you can't find the body, you can't put it in a coffin, what you can do alternatively is actually go to your stoneworker shop, or obviously, you know, do a work order for it. But you're going to want to do rock slab, make the slabs, and then as a separate task, you need to engrave memorial slab. Opens a menu. You have to find the individual dwarf that is like antagonizing or harassing your dwarves as a ghost. I think that there's actually like a little attribute here that says it's a ghost when you're scrolling through this list. I can't recall, but if not, you would just need to like look at the actual name of the ghost and then engrave it to that ghost. Go wherever BFL is slab, place the slab, and then expand from these lists and pick the specific engraved slab for that dwarf. That'll make his ghost go away, and he'll be considered put to rest. So something to consider with your dwarves as they die. But importantly, we don't want our dwarves to die, so another thing I have down here is my hospital. Hospital is going to be super important once you get to this stage in the game when you are having a bunch of fights with forgotten beasts or invasions or whatever, visiting necros sometimes. Having the hospital is going to make it so your dwarves don't die. They're actually pretty good about healing and recovering. So in those fights I talked about, like I'll have a forgotten beast, you know, I'll lose one dwarf, but 5 of them get injured, if not more. The difference between them dying and living, though, is that I have this hospital zone. And the hospital's kind of tricky because you have to stock it with a bunch of things, and there's a bunch of specific different furnitures you need to create. I'll start with the furnitures here. We have these 3 kind of key furnitures. It's going to be traction bench, bed, table. And I think that this is actually the most economic layout for these 2. Because you don't want to... The table is for where the dwarf gets surgery. The doctor will take the dwarf and put him on the table, do the surgery. Multiple dwarves can get surgery on the same table at the same time. Or if they need traction, put them on the traction bench. I think that's for broken limbs. Not totally sure. I'm not a doctor. Definitely not a dwarven doctor. But also, you'll need chests, because beyond just the furniture requirements, there are item requirements for this room. I'll bust one open. Actually, in fact, I can actually hover the zone, view details. There's a bunch of things you need to do here. It'll tell you the things that they want, right? Most important is going to be thread, cloth, splints. That's easy. Crutches, easy if you have wood or iron or anything like that. Buckets, easy. Soap, kind of hard. Not the hardest, but kind of hard. Thread and cloth, also, you know, not totally straightforward depending on what your biome is and how you're getting these things. So, but obviously a lot of complex resources. Additionally, you'll need to assign the medical dwarf in the nobles menu. but also for that specific hospital, you'll need to assign him as the doctor. I've learned in order for him to be able to do anything, you'll also need surgeon, bone doctor, and diagnostician, which I, for some reason, don't have, and I'll just give it to this peasant. Hopefully that'll work. Cool. And so that's what a hospital is. Obviously, a lot of things involved there, and that is why again, I'm not farming food at this point, but I am farming these rope reeds, which are something that my farmers can process into thread, and can be made into cloth, which can be used. They use the thread, they use the cloth at the hospital as well, but also my dwarves can create clothes out of these things because their clothes get ragged and worn, and it gives them unhappy thoughts. So really more important for my biome and this stage of the game, with my amount of wealth I can throw around at the merchants, to not really be worrying about farming food, but worry about farming things that I can turn into thread cloth. Okay, so let's keep moving on. Not really much else to talk about in this area. Here's my stockpile, some more workshops. Dorms for my dwarves. I do see pretty often a layout that's a little smaller than this. It looks something like this with the 2x2 thing going on. I tend to make mine a little bigger because I want to have extra room to add additional furniture. As you can see, the dwarves will take their worn and tattered clothes and just leave them all over the place, and in some circumstances not even put them in the chest. I can relate to that, so I can't really criticize, but that is, why I kill and build them a little bigger, to account for this excess of objects that dwarves will tend to have. It kind of clutters up the screen, and if you don't have room to put stuff in chests, then that'll happen. I would say just in general, make sure that their rooms are smooth at the minimum, if not engraved. At this point in the game, I'm sure that you have a bunch of lazy dwarves that don't have a lot going on, so going through the effort to engrave and smooth these rooms helps a lot with your dwarves' thoughts. So, yeah, nobles and administrators, again, to talk about those, I have not started my barony yet. What will happen is a representative or a liaison from the dwarven homeland will come at a certain point and say, you've accumulated this much wealth, and we're ready to make you a barony, and you have to assign one of your dwarves to be a noble. When they arrive, what you can do is actually delay that by saying, we don't want to do that yet. You can just keep doing that. You won't be able to create new trade agreements, right? I won't be able to request stuff until I say yes. But it makes it so you don't have to worry about another noble to kind of deal with. They're kind of annoying, but that's kind of an endgame thing that, yeah, again, you don't really need to do necessarily. Or at least you can delay it. And then, again, at this point, here's the first cavern layer. Cage traps, like usual, hatches. Again, this is where most of the forgotten beasts are coming from, so... And then, where I've gotten, I can click this button to go to the deepest level, right around the second cavern layer. So obviously going to keep digging down, but that kind of sums up on a high level where you can expect to be around this point. Year 110, you've got, pretty good layout outside, well stockpiled food and drink, 3 squads with all steel, and some other things figured out. You'll see, not all of my dwarves are happy. It is what it is. It's not the end of the world if all of your dwarves aren't happy. They are so neurotic that I think that some of them will just be depressed no matter what you do. It's just something you'll kind of have to accept. So yeah, feel free to leave a comment, like and subscribe. Let me know if you have any questions about anything in particular. And that pretty much sums it up. Feel free to like and subscribe, and write in the comments if you have any questions on anything in particular, or if you have any answers to some of the questions that I myself had during this video. I really appreciate it, and take care.